All right, everyone, I guess we'll get started. Thank you all for coming. Very excited to be here. So a little introduction for myself. My name is Chris Rudolph. I've been with Fivetran for about 3 years now as a sales engineer. I started my career in the late 90s working for a mainframe company, doing mainframe change data capture, data integration. Did that for about 24 years or so before moving to Fivetran. So over the years, I've seen a lot in the ways of DIY pipelines. A lot of my experience early on was with COBOL and assembler and natural things on the mainframe. Later on with Java and other things to move data. At Fivetran, we have about 700 data pipelines pre-built to move from a variety of SaaS data sources and as well as databases, doing change data capture. The whole purpose of this is to kind of talk about DIY and some of the ways it's great and some of the ways that there's challenges to deal with it. So just a couple of things here. If I go to my next slide. So with the whole AI boom, it's just taken over like wildfire, like almost nothing I've seen in my career since like going back to when we had the GUI browsers and got away from things like Gopher and Archie. It's just incredible things you can do with AI. I feel like there we go. And the thing about AI is that the data that people are using for these learning models is all, in a lot of cases, built on pre-existing pipelines that are used for existing data reporting purposes, data warehouses. And a lot of times you start digging into the data, it's like, we have all this cool stuff we want to do with AI, but is the underlying data that's being used to train AI and used for these applications, is it any good? And that's part of the whole thing. It's just the data itself, with different ways it's being pulled. And the other part is just the increasing complexity. There's just so many more SaaS applications now, so many more databases. Third-party places are coming from a variety of sources in an organization. As a sales engineer, we talk with different customers, and we have some sites that we talk with, and everything they have, all the data they have, is all coming from third parties. And their challenge is, how do I get these third-party data into my cloud data warehouse, into my Snowflake, into my Databricks? In other cases, the challenge is like, well, I have people who are using Excel, and I have Access databases and Oracle 9i and all this other stuff. How do I get it in? And so there's a lot of challenges, and to make sure that you have this data being into these learning models in a way that's going to make sense. So data practitioners, the people who are actually doing the data, they have an immense amount of control because essentially they're the ones responsible for the care and feeding of these data pipelines. And that's, the work they do is sort of the shoulders then that Gen AI is going to stand on moving forward. So some stats here from our group, a couple of different research firms who work with, I think this is from IDC, in terms of where data is being spent on AI projects. And I was kind of surprised, but not surprised to see these stats here. 67% of the data is being spent just preparing the data for AI. In some cases, this is just working on data pipelines, trying to get stuff out of applications, maybe figuring out different ETL strategies. It can also be just going through lengthy cleansing processes to make sure you actually have valid data within the system. The other 33% is just actually being spent on the time building the AI models. So it's really like a kind of what the opposite of what you'd hope to have. You'd hope to have the data being delivered there. And you can spend most of your time working on those data models themselves. So some more stats here for us. When we look at, so the data we're putting these data pipelines. How often do you have to rebuild a data pipeline? And there's a number of different reasons you might have to rebuild these things. You have changing sources. You have schema changes taking place in the system. Other things, new use cases coming in. And when we look at the numbers here, 41% say they have to rebuild them sometimes, 39% saying they have to constantly rebuild them. I kind of, look at wonder what the underlying data is. Why are you constantly having to rebuild these? Is it because of changing conditions within the market that you're using? Is it because stuff's just breaking all the time? And they also look at the other side, that 18% and the 2%, and kind of wonder, are these, you never rebuild your pipelines. Is it because no one's looking at the data? So the data is not very good? Or is this a scenario where you have set up a product in there, and because of the reliability of the product, it's doing all the work for you, so you don't have to build these pipelines very frequently? But I think just kind of going back to the previous slide, we can see here maybe why we have that 67% if we have a large portion of data leaders saying that they have to be building these pipelines on a regular basis. So this is a slide that, having done this for a long time, spoke very strongly to me in terms of DIY. And kind of the first part here, copying data is easy, right? You have a new project, we need to put stuff into the data warehouse, and it's kind of very easy just to sling some code, set up some extract jobs, and start getting things in the data warehouse. And now you have it, management is happy, you have the reports being generated. And then the other thing too is that data modeling, as you're putting these things in, you're building these pipelines. We have Oracle timestamps, which aren't playing nicely. We have this DB2 timestamp of 0, for the middle of the night that's different than everyone else's timestamp. Or we have weird integer data floating point. And at some point, it becomes easier to say, you know what, I can't quite get everything in with the data types, keeping them all as it exists in the source database. So I'm just going to make everything a string. And if everything's a string, well, then that removes the problems I have trying to get some of these challenging data types into the system. But the problem you have now is the Gen AI that's looking at that, the reporting analytics. Are they really getting everything they need? Are you having duplicates now because there's some subtleties in the data that your primary keys aren't picking up on? And that's kind of where you start seeing the underside of this iceberg, right? Of all the things that start happening with your own pipelines that you've developed. The first one of these is schema drift. And this is something I saw a ton of on the mainframe side. This mainframe application is going away in the next 5 years, and so we're not making any changes to it. And I knew that was almost never going to be correct because everyone's still adding columns, adding fields, making things bigger. There's always changes happening in these databases. And typically, if you're the one who's consuming the data at the data warehouse level, at the cloud data warehouse level, you're usually the last to know whenever these changes are coming into the schema. The DBAs or the application folks are making the changes, and they're going in. How tightly coupled is the process through? Are you able to capture these schema changes when they happen so that you can have the downstream processing aware of it? Another thing is automation. In talking with people over the years, I've seen a lot of hero activities in terms of you build the pipelines, lots of weekends and late nights lost because something's breaking. The automation is something where it works, we rely on it, and then something goes wrong and we don't know about it until someone on the business side is saying, oh, looks like this data is a couple weeks old. What's happening here? Automation, whenever we were developing our own software at my last stop, was a big challenge for us because you would kind of get this false sense of security that everything is working properly, but you weren't realizing that your latency periods were growing and growing, and there wasn't notification on that. And the last thing you always want to do is make sure you're ahead of this so that you're not hearing from the business users that the data's out stale. So that's a big challenge when you're building your own pipelines, is have this automation built in so that things are running on a regular basis and that you are assured that you have that level of reliability and consistency. idempotence, I just think of it as resiliency. As you're building these data pipelines, you have to have resiliency baked in. There's a lot of situations I've seen where something breaks the data pipeline. Well, let's just run it again. Maybe it's going to work this time. Or maybe we're going to recover from backup and then kick it off. All right, now it completed successfully, so we're good. Maybe you're not realizing there's going to be duplicate data that's being put into the pipeline. Or sometimes it's the opposite. I have a customer recently has their own process pulling out of dynamic CRM. It's just a nightly truncate the destination and do a load. Well, one night there was a network blip. And so the truncate worked, but the load failed. And there wasn't enough resiliency baked in where I was able to recover from that process. And it was the business users who were a couple days later were finding that this data is just missing from CRM. Unfortunately, the guy who wrote the pipeline, he's on vacation, so now he's getting calls to go and fix his pipeline. So resiliency is a huge thing in these, because you have people relying on this data. And then scaling, scaling is difficult because the underlying, LLTP systems that are running these things, they're running faster all the time. There's always more data flowing to these source applications, and the challenge is to keep up with it. And maybe the ETL process that was set up a couple years ago, when there's less volume of the database, there are fewer tables. The tables themselves had fewer columns. Starts breaking down because those batch cycles keep getting longer and longer for doing the data extracts, as well as the loads into the destination database. So scaling is a difficult thing because you write these pipelines, but changes happen in the business and you have to continually be updating your DIY pipelines to keep up with those changes. And the last one here is one that I have a friend of mine who's a security engineer over at Bridgestone, And security is a huge thing that he tells me about all the time. About, a complaint he has is that we have these FTP servers that aren't secured. We have database extracts running, just the CSV files and putting things different places. And the hope is that, well, everything's behind our VPN, so it should be okay. But you don't have a lot of cases, you don't have any type of encryption based on these data flows. You're extracting data from maybe an older database like a SQL Server 2008, Oracle 11, Oracle 9. A lot of times in the enterprise, we see these older databases lying around because the application that uses them, the concern is if we upgrade the database, the application is going to break. So it's safer just to keep everything as it is and continue running for a period of time. But you don't have that security built into the process. And the other thing I see too with these pipelines is that as you're going through, all right, we have a new use case now, we're going to build a new pipeline. We want to do things the right way, we're going to have security encryption. But you also have the accumulated tech debt for all these other jobs that have been created in the past. How often are you going back and updating those things to meet modern requirements? So security is a huge thing. We see all the headlines. I think Cerner's the latest one to have a hack because someone's able to get access to a legacy server and go in through some way. So these are kind of some of the challenges we have when we look at our DIY pipelines. So this information here, I think, is from a Waystar. I think it was the consulting company we used, just to dive into some facts here based on the research. And so data pipelines, DIY pipelines are more secure. And the answer, I think we all know, is going to be false, just because of some of the things I was mentioning earlier. These things don't always have security built in from the start. Usually it's more of an extract process that the goal is, well, we're running behind a corporate firewall, so everything should be safe from that standpoint. The whole governance thing, lack of incident reporting, proper error handling, these can be very challenging to set up in the pipelines because you set them up and you have expectations, of what maybe might happen, but then there's always the weird database errors that take place, file systems running out of space, other things that happen from a security standpoint. That's going to, not be the most secure. And the other thing, just to talk about Fivetran and some of the other people who move data, there are all kinds of certifications we have to have from SOC 2, ISO 2000, 3000, whatever it is, various penetration tests, everything else. And so Fivetran and others like us have to go through all these, various certifications for moving data. A lot of times what we see on the DIY side is that there's no certification of the data pipelines to ensure they're being written in a secure fashion. DIY pipelines offer customization. Well, of course, they're going to offer customization, right? Because it's your code. You can do whatever you want with it. Well, what our research says is false, is that it's kind of a false promise of customization because of just, you have all this complexity that ends up getting baked into the process, where you have, you're extracting things, trying to combine multiple tables together to go to loads, and there's other things coming from different systems. And this whole level of complexity kind of builds a bit of a, almost, I don't want to say Rube Goldberg, but builds a very complex environment that can be difficult to manage and can also lead to situations where, yes, there are other sources we'd like to go against, but our existing process we have is not going to be able to support these because of the complexity we are baked in, kind of calcifies things in place, makes it difficult for an organization to move forward and get more data from various sources into that destination. And the other thing here, we talk about modern tools, just the scalability that we have, being able to kind of baked in to be able to handle different things. From my perspective, going from extract, transform, and load to extract, load, transform is a huge improvement. Because when you think about when you have these DIY pipelines, all the transformations you're doing, it's usually not the extraction layer where things are going to break. Yeah, you might lose the connection to the database, so you have to make sure that you're going to connect to it again. Same thing as loading things into the system. As long as your data types are correct, things should load in properly. All right, you have a network blip. Now we go restart again. You should be fine. It's the transformation. It's where you have things like dirty data or other things that were not anticipated for when the pipelines are being created. They cause it to break. The pipeline breaks because of the transformation error. Nothing's to the target, so you're kind of dead in the water at that point. You can't really go forward. So being able to switch from that to an ETL, or ELT rather, where we're extracting, loading the data into the destination, then doing the transformation, something breaks the transformation. Well, we still have the data out there. It's not in the format we want, but there's still things we can do to kind of work around the issue as we go to fix these transformations. Last one here, you can probably see where the things are going here. DIY pipelines are cheaper. And once again, our research says false. And the reasons for this are many. That first one there, cost, various hidden costs. This is something I've seen a lot of just in my career in terms of people working very, very hard to kind of keep the trains running on time. Lots of weekends and nights lost. One of my companies was a logistics company, my old stop, and there the guy had written this whole process to make sure they had all the paperwork ready for the trucks to go across the Mexican border. They had this outage window, and so there's all kinds of truncation that had to happen and loading different things into this data warehouse. And he and his wife were at a very swanky resort, but he realized he didn't have any connectivity for Wi-Fi. So that was him, at the little business center at night at like 1 a.m. Yep, still running, still running, still running. 5 a.m. Yep, complete successfully. Good job. And that's the type of thing I think a lot of us do. Those activities, kind of called hero activities. And there's kind of the hidden cost for us, just of our time spent to keep these things up and running. The other thing we see is a longer time to value. AI, I can take Claude, AI, and I can say, hey, Claude, I have a SQL Server database, and I need to extract these tables, and I need to go into Snowflake, and can you whip something up for me? And it does. But then there's all the kind of the unknown complexity of putting something in production, of doing the testing that's required for it. And it just always ends up taking longer than you anticipate, just because of all the things you don't know going into it that you then have to learn as you're going through the process. A couple other things here. Modern integration tools can do more with less. That's one of the things at Fivetran, because we do this every day, all day, every day. We're obsessed with security, is that we have a lot of best practices, a lot of things we've learned just in terms of how we're going against the database, against these different data sources. There's been multiple iterations, multiple cycles of improvement, because that's all we do, is just manage these data pipelines. And I guess the other thing too here under costs is just increased focus on strategic initiatives. And that's another one where it's like you're setting these pipelines up for use case A, but then life happens and now these other use cases all hanging off the pipeline. And sometimes the cost of running these things just sort of starts spiraling out of control, because you're now having to do multiple extracts. The source data systems that you're pulling against now need additional server capabilities, additional CPU to be able to handle these extract requirements. So an example here I have is HubSpot, and I just wanted to print out some notes about this, so I wasn't trying to squint on the speaker notes. But HubSpot came to Fivetran a couple years ago with a recruiting use case they had. The problem they had was that all their recruitment, their fast-growing company, had to add lots of employees, was all being based on extracts going to Excel spreadsheets and doing ODBC connections to Excel. And it was difficult whenever senior management would ask for various statistics. Like, well, we'll have to get back to you on that because we have to build a new spreadsheet to find this out and get data through. And so that's why they came to Fivetran, saying, it's becoming untenable for us to try to have our own pipelines for this. We need some help. And so Fivetran got to work. We implemented our cloud solution for them. And a couple things we did. We improved the workforce productivity and planning by utilizing HR data with generative AI. Their predictive metrics accuracy improved by 90%, from 3 to 5% of the actual results, which was just a huge leap forward for them, because when they were just slinging spreadsheets, it was difficult to get accurate data, because the underlying data that they were using for the spreadsheets was sometimes out of date, it was old, it was back leveled. So having Fivetran be able to do very fast delivery of this data was great for their reporting capabilities. Enabled accurate forecasting and delivered meaningful insights by providing access to hiring and recruitment data was another benefit they had. And the information here that I'm reading from, this is all from our HubSpot case study on the Fivetran website. The last two things here that I kind of wrote down from that case study: reduced pipeline development from 6 to 10 weeks to under an hour. And so just sort of kind of going back to this previous slide here, longer time to value. It's one of the things that Fivetran excels at is shortening that time to value. So how quickly can we start, once we talk to the data source, how quickly we can land it into the destination. And finally, saved $100,000 in data engineering labor in the first year. So the ROI was very quickly realized. So thank you for the marketing team. Pipelines go from DIY to ready for AI, Fivetran feeling. And so these are kind of some of the things here, going back to my previous slides, that Fivetran provides compared to DIY pipeline, is that reliability, scalability, and secure. And that's kind of the whole basis for Fivetran, is to make sure we have an extremely secure, reliable, and resilient data pipelines we create that can outperform and provide very fast time to value. And at the end of this presentation, I'm going to do a little demo here from Fivetran for those of you who haven't seen it before. So where does Fivetran fit in on this? Probably too small to see, but at this top layer, we have things like event collectors, sales analytics, product analytics, marketing, finance. So all the various departments that have a mixture of on-prem databases, cloud databases, data warehouses, SaaS applications, third-party data maybe coming from SFTP or Kafka or Azure Event Hub. And Fivetran is syncing from all these different places. Over 700 connectors and building more all the time. When I started back in 2022, I think we had about 150, 200 connectors. So just a huge growth in the environment that we support. And our targets, they can be a lot of different things. They can just be your traditional relational databases, SQL Server, Postgres. It could be cloud data warehouses, Snowflake, Databricks, Google BigQuery. Something we're really proud of right now, we're going to provide, actually we currently provide what we call managed data lake service. So think containers, ADLS, S3, and we can write to those in an Iceberg or a Delta format. But more so than that, we're also going to handle all the deduping of changes going through. So if you have multiple transactions hitting the same key values inside of the source system, we can just do a like-for-like replication to those cloud environments, those cloud containers, so you can query them just like you would a database. We handle all the kind of the truncation of cleaning up with them too after periods of time. And so from there, we integrate with various transformation layers, orchestration. So think Coalesce, DBT, Cloud DBT, Core DBT. Fivetran also has its own quick start transformations we've written for, I think, about 100 of the connectors we support right now. And so this really allows you to kind of fit into the organization where Fivetran becomes kind of an extension of your data engineering team to be able to land the data inside your destinations. Something we're also extremely proud of, aside from the managed servers service for the cloud containers, is Connector SDK. The thought being, the amount of sources out there continues to grow exponentially. Fivetran has our development team building sort of our mainline connectors for various use cases. We have a request by program for our customers. So if they have connectors, SaaS applications we don't currently support, we'll build a connector for them. But even then, there's still more and more need. So the thought was, how can we take the power of these Fivetran connectors and make it easy to integrate for our customers? And that was the birth of this Connector SDK. The thought being, if you can essentially point the Connector SDK to the REST API and have it do the extraction, then all the things that Fivetran brings to the table, the resiliency, the ability to do schema detection, the reliability, that can all be handled from this Connector SDK. And so we're actually running a program right now. For new customers, we'll actually go and build a couple Connector SDKs for them to show them how the whole thing works. I've been on a project with all the sales engineers where we've been challenged to write our own Connector SDK. So in my case, it was went to pull from the US Census. And so I fired up my Connector SDK and did some work on it, and it failed. I started digging, well, why is this thing failing? Oh, because the US Census documentation on the REST API is not correct. They deprecated a couple columns, but didn't actually bother to update the documentation. So I was like, well, this is just sort of like the whole DIY thing over again, as you kind of have to dig in and go through. So a few more slides here before we get to the demo. So why Fivetran? And I've kind of been touching a couple of these things here. Reliability, I think our reliability now is like 99.93% if you factor in third-party issues, and 99.95% when you look at just Fivetran Cloud alone. So we're always trying to add more nines to that as sort of the challenging from our engineering team. 500 plus engineers plus customer support. These data pipelines are fully managed by Fivetran. They can be flowing through Fivetran SaaS. They can also be flowing through your own architecture, as we provide a container that essentially has the data layer is going to take place, where Fivetran handles the orchestration metadata in the cloud. Scalability, these things are built to scale very quickly. We are constantly making improvements to the overall performance and scalability of our architecture. Multiple regions around the world where we can deploy Fivetran, and all the major cloud vendors, AWS, GCP, Azure, multiple countries, multiple regions around the world. And the other thought being for scalability, how do we choose change data capture out of a variety of databases with minimal impact on the database? Something that's kind of baked into our process. A couple years ago, Fivetran purchased a company called HVR, standing for High Volume Replication, best of breed software for moving terabytes of data in the course of a day via CDC to destinations. Fivetran's taken that technology and baked it into our cloud, into our connectors. And the last thing is security. We have a website called trust.fivetran.com, and you go out there, it has all of our SOC reports, it has all of our penetration testing, all the various things we do for disaster recovery. Just because to be part of this modern data architecture stack, you have to make sure that security is paramount in everything you do. Everything we move with Fivetran has to be secured. We provide customer managed encryption keys for sites that sort of want that big button of I'm just going to hit this and stop everything, in addition to our own security. Everything's encrypted, both at rest and in flight. For databases where it doesn't natively provide encryption, so think maybe like a SQL Server 2008, Oracle 11i, where this is I think it was like TLS 1.1, no longer considered best of breed. We have requirements then to go through proxy agents or use secure tunneling or use things like private link or private connections to get to these sources. So we're always going to make sure everything is very, very securely moved. We're not storing any data within our platform. It's just a pass-through. So once we land the data into the destination, any type of containers we use for the creation of the data are immediately destroyed from our environment. And so this is some statistics here from one of our retail customers. Some values they found: 1.5 million in average annual benefits. This was from, I think, 2 years ago. And they got that a couple of different ways, right? It was from the operational cost savings. So essentially Fivetran's orchestrating everything for the data pipelines. It was also the annual benefits for each data source. What they found, that it was faster and cheaper for them to use Fivetran to spin up these data sources than it was for them to build the pipelines on their own. And then the, I guess, 83,000 additional net revenue. And I said, well, wait a second, those numbers don't add up to 1.5. What's happening here? It's like, well, what you have to understand is there are many different sources we're pulling from, and this was over a 3-year period for that 1.5 million. And just a quote I liked because it sort of reminded me of Jurassic Park a little bit. Just because you can write custom code to meet the need doesn't necessarily mean that's the best way to do it. So I'm going to exit out now. Thank you all very much, and I'm going to jump over to my demo. And what we're going to show here, this is just our standard sales engineering demo. If I can pull this up here and expand out. Great. So I was having some limitations logging onto Google to show this on the destination data. I can try to get in again. But what I want to do is kind of walk you through the Fivetran dashboard. I was kind of saying a lot of things here about time to value, ease of use. And it's like, all right, well, that sounds good, but what does it look like under the hood? And so what you're seeing here is just kind of a main page. I'm going to start with the destination and then go in the connectors, because I always like to look at where we're going to be putting data first before we actually land the data. So this is just our sales engineering demo environment. We have a number of different sources. I'm not sure if you can see this from the back there. Just click over here. So, Databricks, BigQuery, Snowflake, Azure Data Lakes. if I just go through kind of the process here to create one of these things, we have a whole list of managed data lakes in here, as well as the various databases we support. And actually, I'll do this a different way. I'll come back here and just take a look at an existing one. So if I pull up BigQuery, and we'll go ahead and we'll edit this. So what are the components of a destination inside of Fivetran? So in the case of BigQuery, you're going to have a project you're going to look at. You're going to have a service account. If we're looking at like a Snowflake or Databricks, you have similar questions in terms of what's the connection you're going to use for the URL, what's going to be your authentication method you're using, as well as what's going to be the region where you're going to be running Fivetran in. So what country you're going to be running the software in, what's going to be the cloud provider that you're going to be using, AWS, Azure, or GCP, as well as the actual region where the processing is going to take place. We have high availability built into our destinations, so that for some reason if something goes down, you can specify a failover region within the data pipeline. One of the things I also like too about Fivetran is that we have all the documentation side by side, usually with large amounts of screenshots. I've been known for various SaaS applications to have never used a SaaS before, thinking of ServiceNow, but just going through the process we have here with the screenshots and everything just to set up the connections. So Fivetran essentially is you're giving an environment within your cloud data warehouse. We'll pick another one here, we'll pick Snowflake. And this is going to be for our hybrid deployment where all the data is going to be flowing through your VPC. So now we don't have to worry about the region, but we still have to specify an agent to use, and then how we're going to be landing the data, as well as the connection information for the database itself, how we're going to be authenticating to it. We'll be using a password, or in most cases, just using a key pair. And typically, people will have a service account they'll use for this destination. And there's other use cases here we have for ADLS S3, where you're specifying the cloud storage buckets you want to use to land the data, regions where you want to land it. We'll take a look now at the connection side. And one of the first ones we'll take a look at is SAP. I know SAP is in the news a lot. They have, they're moving a lot of their customers to the SAP cloud, SAP Rise. But they also have the big issue of what do we do with all of our customers still running ECC? Well, 2024 will be, 2027, 2030 will be the cutoff date for ECC. So it continues to go out there as they work with that. But Fivetran has been working very closely to figure out different ways of moving that SAP data. And we have numerous customers who are using our HVR product to do SAP ECC data replication, also using Fivetran's high volume agents to move the data. And now we have, I'm just going to filter out to BigQuery, a HANA connector, which went GA last year. And this SAP ERP connector, the thought being, well, if you're in a Rise environment, you're not going to have access to be able to go through the, through the underlying database. So this is designed to go through the application layer. So how are we doing that? A couple things. We're going to provide you with network transport. That's essentially going to have the ABAP code you need. And this is the download you're going to do. It's all just regular code put in there. So that's the network transport layer we're using to call SAP through our connector. We have some talking about security. We can do both an SNC connection, so secure network connection from SAP. So essentially our SAP connection is encrypted by SAP. Or we can also do no SNC and then use some type of proxy or SSH private link to ensure that we're going to have an encrypted connection to talk to that SAP system. And then going forward, user credentials, client information. If we're doing some type of tunneling that's in here, as I mentioned earlier, just all this information side by side. So I'll go ahead and just back out of here. Each one of these connectors, we can do a little save and test. I'm just going to make sure that I exit out. And this is the same for all the connectors, where essentially we can just go and test the connection. And we're going to verify that we have connectivity through this tunnel here to talk to SAP. Other things we had on that page as well are things like, from an orchestration level, how frequently do you want Fivetran to be running? Once a day, once an hour, every minute? Looks like our connection succeeded here. So verified our connection to the database, verified a connection through the tunnel to the database, credentials, that we have all the correct permissions, and we're now ready for back to the connector. There we go. Other things we want to show here are schema. When we look at moving data with Fivetran, of course we have, if I just expand one of these guys out here, various tables defined. You can, of course, do blocking. We have built-in hashing, so if you have PII data, you can do hashing of the values. Everything I'm doing within the dashboard, we also have a full REST API with a Terraform provider, so you can also use code to build these data pipelines as well as just doing it kind of manually as I'm doing it today. When we look at landing the data into the destination, how are we going to do it? Are we going to be doing soft deletes or history mode, where we can have a slowly changing dimension? So everything transaction happening in that system, if we want to be audit proof, can be landed to the destination through Fivetran. So as you can see, it's pretty simple to go through these processes to get set up. There's also some filtering options available as well, which is newly introduced to do filtering based on various values within the data. And finally, if we just go ahead and just add another column in here. Another table going through, and trying to think of another SAP one here. And if I can't think of anything off the top of my head, we'll just go to a different connector. All right, so I can see any results here. The last part, just to kind of finish up in terms of some visibility into it. If we go by day, looks like we have some things happening. Let's do like a refresh on one of these schemas. And we'll do a resync. And so this is going to kick off a process to do reload on the table. And while this is running, we'll go ahead and take a look at another connector. And this time we'll take a look at a SaaS one. Salesforce is always a big, or Workdays are good ones, use cases for us to do. Whereas when we look at connecting to a SaaS application, a little different than a database, we're not going to have, all the setup work you have to do on the database side, just purely going through the application layer. And so we'll need to things like, all right, are we going to go through an OAuth connection, or are we going to just use basic, credentials to sign into it? Are we going to use authorization keys for things like Workday and for many other connectors we support? There are custom fields that have been added to it, formula fields, so we can go ahead and capture all this information within the connector itself. Other things we take a look at here, I had talked about from a schema perspective, I meant to show this on the other one, just the ability to be able to handle schema drift. So within Fivetran, we have options saying, all right, so if there's a column change, how do you want us to handle it? Any column changes, table changes, schema changes, automatically send those to the destination, or only send just column changes, or just block everything, but do notification. So various kind of different things built into here. For the syncing perspective, all the user credentials in here, we support things like single sign-on, SAML, RBAC, so you can have very, very granular levels of control of who has access to the data within Fivetran. We're not actually displaying the data at all within our dashboard. We're just essentially the connectors you're using to land that data into your destination. And so we've talked about the extraction, transformation, or extraction, load. Last part here is transformations. I had touched on this a little bit during the presentation in terms of Fivetran. We're not doing the transformations ourselves. We're calling off to Coalesce, to DBT, DBT Cloud, DBT Core, or using one of our pre-built connectors for this work. And so if we just take a look at one of these guys here, we can run these things on a schedule where it's going to be at a particular point in time, or we're going to say whenever Fivetran lands the data, we can push the changes off into the destination. So I think that leaves us here with about 5 minutes left. And I kind of wanted to stop here because I always like in these sessions to see if there's any questions at all, things I presented that you'd like more information on. And then if there's no other questions, we can just go to lunch a little early. Yes.
Yeah, appreciate it. And thank you for the walkthrough. It's very enlightening. I think the biggest question I have is it seems like there's some functionality similarities between other products that we've seen as well. What would you say are like the biggest three things that make you stand out versus the competitors in this space?
That's a great question. And, and the people in the space, our competitors, you have to be really good in the space because there's just so much competition. So they're all doing a great job. But things like reliability, being 99.9% reliable, is something we hear a lot of because our existing solution is missing data, right? Or there's times when it breaks down. And if you can't be reliable, that's one of the core tenets. That's like your main purpose, is to be extremely reliable. The second thing that I think is very important for Fivetran is just our level of innovation, right? Just the fact that we're constantly adding to our cloud. The people who built Fivetran are still at the company. Our CEO came from a CMU background, University of Pittsburgh, as a neurobiologist, and then pivoted to doing data. But he's been just constantly working with the engineering teams, constantly saying how can we get better. And so a couple of times we've had to do rollbacks because there have been issues like we're just going to stop, do it right. So just that level of innovation we have, I don't see that same level of innovation with our competitors. And I think it's something that really sets Fivetran apart. A sign of that was when we purchased HVR and then have rolled all that technology into our Fivetran cloud. And then I think the last thing is just security. And the security is always on our mind, especially with all the hacks out there. We have to keep people's data secure. If we had a security breach, that would just be disastrous for Fivetran. And I think kind of the lore is if you're running data on premise, it's like, well, it's out of our hands now, right? But in our case, because all the data is flowing through our cloud, we have to be, on point each day, every day from that aspect.
Question on security.
Yes.
When you're connecting to the BigQuery, you're using the service account, right?
Yes.
Does it support WIF?
Excuse me?
WIF, Workload Identity Federation?
I don't know the answer to that off the top of my head. Is Jordan Martz, my colleague's in here? I don't know. I can find out. Let's see. Yeah, so all of our documentation, and this is what I ended up doing here. Go down to the destination. And so, all right, I'll accept the cookies. So we talk about connection options we have for running. This is all for all of our destinations in terms of, how do you want to connect to it? Just safe list, go through SSH tunnel, reverse SSH, use VPN, or in the case of Google, going through the private Google access is usually the mechanism that you would use there. I'm sorry, I thought I clicked on this mouse. And so this is, again, get into the private Google access for all the support there. And I think we have instructions here in terms of what you have to do to get that set up. I guess let's support a character sets, a couple other things.
One more question on data loading.
Mm-hmm.
Do you have any metrics on loading the data, how much volume of data, how much time?
So the question was, do we have any metrics on loading data? And that's usually very dependent upon the data source we're pulling from. Pulling from SAS is never going to be as fast as pulling from a database. Whenever Fivetran is moving data, we're doing extract, load, transform. So we're going through extraction, loading before we actually land the data into the destination. One of the benefits of doing this is it keeps your destination cloud costs lower because while we're doing all the extraction from whatever the source is, we're not actually we're in the background, we're building a container. And it's only when we're done with the extraction or we've been extracting for about 6 hours or we're going to land the data into that destination to keep the costs low. We have people who are doing 8 terabytes a day of data from it's one of the National Bank of Australia. It's 8 terabytes a day. That's all going to Databricks through Fivetran. So we can scale to move just massive amounts of data. Because when you're looking at that much data coming in from these sources, it's like not how fast, it's like the building in the Panama Canal. It's not how fast can I dig, it's how fast can I get the dirt out, right? And that's kind of the issue. When we're looking through this, we have just massive archive logs and redo logs that we have to go through. And that's something we're designed to do, to be able to process that data at a very high rate. And when you kind of get into the covers for our different databases we support, you'll find that we have different strategies for extracting data in terms of, is it a third-party data that doesn't have any database logs for us to change data capture on, or is it some OLTP database that's just crushing, a very high volume of data an hour? And we have different strategies depending on what the use case is. So I think it's about 12:15 now, so I still got other questions. Thank you very much. I'll be here, talk about data stuff, MGs, running, whatever you guys want. So thank you.